Well, shares of Nissan Motor Company have fallen to their lowest in a decade as of Friday, thanks to deep cuts to the Japanese automaker's earnings forecast. There are also big questions surrounding Nissan's future profitability. On Thursday, Nissan posted its first quarterly net loss in almost 10 years, with the company warning that full-year operating profit would be its weakest in 11 years. So to help make sense of this, let's bring in Lauren Fix. She is the car coach. Lauren, glad that you're here. No way to call it anything else but a tough week for Nissan. But more than that, what do they do now to kind of right the ship?
Well, the first thing they need to be doing is to be working a little tighter with Renault and with Mitsubishi. Now, I know this was a big factor that we've talked about in the past, but the reason that all this came down and this coup came into play is the Japanese misunderstood and thought that the French car company was going to take them over because they have controlling interest. But that was not the case. In reality, the deal that should be is that they share platforms, share technology, and share drive lines. If they can do that with the three car companies, all three will survive. And instead, all three have taken a huge hit. And Nissan's response to that was to send out a lawsuit toward Carlos Ghosn for $91 million.
Yeah, and just speaking of that, Carlos Ghosn seems to be kind of sucking up all the oxygen surrounding the story as well. I mean, how much longer is that saga going to continue? And very quickly, just catch up our viewers on how he plays into all this.
Well, right now, Carlos Ghosn, who is the ex-CEO of Nissan, who was also the president of the group with Renault, which he was the president as well as Mitsubishi, he was working on a merger so they could all work together. Like I had stated, they work together closer, they share platforms, everybody succeeds. But in reality, because of a misunderstanding and whatever reason, they decided to have a coup against Carlos Ghosn. He, as we talked about in the past, escaped to Lebanon, and right now he's trying to get all the paperwork because of this lawsuit. And of course, he's not supposed to be traveling outside the country, but hey, at least he's free rather than being in a Japanese prison.
Well, right now he is, and I'm sure we'll figure out what goes from here. But when Geely bought Volvo, the idea was to leave it as a standalone Swedish car company, but not anymore. So Geely is going to absorb Volvo into one global business unit, but it seems that the vehicles will maintain their old branding. Is that right? And is this move about actually the slowing of the auto industry economy?
Well, there is a slowing in the economy, but obviously anytime you can share platforms and technology, you're going to save money. So Geely, which is a Chinese company, owning a small portion of Volvo, which they purchased in 2010, Volvo's always been about safety. They developed the seatbelt. That's always been their thing about safety and being ahead of the game. And part of that is they want to do more electric platforms. So in order to have hybrid or mild hybrid, which in other words, you get the boost of the hybrid when you need it coming off the light, but you still have that gasoline-powered engine or a plug-in if you choose, is something that they'll be able to now have more technology from Geely. They'll be two separate, they'll be also still holding the company in Sweden, but there'll be two separate stock exchanges that they'll be on, one in Hong Kong and then one in Europe. So I think that this is probably a really good thing for Volvo because they'll have more cash flow available to do even bigger and better things.
I mean, Volvo has always been kind of known for its safety, but Volvo Trucks did launch its first step into marketing electric heavy-duty trucks in the U.S., including tractor trailers. Now, the program said they'll put more than 50 of these electric trucks into service. Now, as part of this type of strategy, Volvo is working to get 58 public and private charging stations developed. Where will those even be located?
Well, right now they're talking about testing in California. They have 5 on the roads right now. They're talking about having 23 Volvo. These are Class 8 trucks. We're talking like big rigs for hauling things that'll be available in Southern California by the end of the year. Where you really see the use of this is like in Long Beach. All those big containers come in off the trucks. They need to go a short distance to a warehouse or to a train. So that's where that really makes a lot of sense to be using these Class 8 trucks. Using the long haul across the United States is probably not the wisest choice because the charging times are quite dramatic.
Yeah, speaking of quite dramatic, the UK made headlines this week.
Dramatic as hours, hours and hours and hours.
Right. The UK was making headlines, though, when it announced this week that it wants to move up that deadline for killing off all gasoline and diesel vehicles, all of them. They moved that up to 2032. That's just 12 years from now. Now, if you think back 12 years and what automobiles were doing 12 years ago, there wasn't any kind of unbelievable earth-shaking change. So even if they could get all these vehicles on the road and they could get everything else off, does the UK even have the electric infrastructure to plug in all those vehicles?
You're right, Ben, and that's one of the biggest things. They don't have a grid that can support this. So even with putting billions of dollars into updating the grid, and it would be maybe even trillions of dollars, you still have outliers. In London, it might be possible, but when you go out to the country, I think that's where you're going to have your biggest problem, where you do need gas and diesel. And they do have plug-in hybrids as well. They want to eliminate all of that. So the only options would be electric or hydrogen. In other words, you could not purchase any of those vehicles. What you're going to do is cause the used car market to be bolstered. People are going to keep their vehicles longer, and they're thinking they're going to incentivize on top of that to get people to go to electric vehicles. It doesn't work for everybody. It works for some people, but thinking that it leaves you with a zero carbon footprint is not the answer. Remember that all the batteries in these electric vehicles, they all come from mines owned by China. So they will no longer be beholden to the Middle East or wherever else they get their oil from. They're going to be getting their components from China, and they still have an electric grid problem. They don't have enough electricity. Again, where is that going to come from? Coal, natural gas, or nuclear power? This is the same problem China is having as they push further and further for more regulations. And here in the U.S., it's just not taking hold. We only have 2% of our total sales of 17 million cars are plug-ins. I mean, people just aren't buying them because of the limitations, because of the cost of higher insurance. I mean, there's the grid. I mean, there's so many factors that are causing people to really think twice and thinking, you know what? Gasoline, great fuel-efficient cars. Diesel, especially in Europe, makes a lot of sense. You go longer distances between fill-ups, and they've made diesel even cleaner than it ever was.
Yeah, we are short on time, but I want to follow up very quickly on that. Is that the problem with a lot of these mandates, though? Because it's almost like good intentions are getting in the way of reality, because in some communities, as you said, you're either going to not be allowed to have a vehicle at all, or you're going to be forced to be on some kind of public or mass transit. And if you live out in the country, if you're out in those rural areas, that's not even really an option for you. Last word here, in terms of not just the UK, but in other places that are following this example, are they getting ahead of themselves?
I think you're 100% correct. They're getting ahead of themselves, as we would say, or my father would say, you're putting the cart before the horse. You know, you have to have an infrastructure before you go ahead and make this demand. And if you do have the infrastructure, what's the total cost? And will consumers buy into it? Because if they don't, then you're just wasting time. So you are 100% correct.
Lauren Fix, the car coach, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.